thank Chet Pleben for the visit a few minutes ago, and we welcome back today John Ziegler from FramingPaterno.com, because we've got some other things to talk about as well. Hello, John. How are you today?
Kevin, 2 days in a row with you makes it a hell of a week. So this is great.
I'm telling you, the passion level is high here.
Well, when the two of us get together, there's no absence of passion.
That's exactly what I was just telling Scott, my producer. I said, we're both passionate. We don't rein it in, but that's a good thing. That means people know that we care about it. And we've got this story that I seemingly innocently texted you about today. Brian Banks, who was a black football player in high school, was accused of rape, went to prison for 5 years, missed his college career, got out, was able to videotape the accuser saying that, recanting her story. He then was all over the Today Show, every place else. The Seattle Seahawks gave him a tryout. And you're telling me that you've investigated the story and you find his claims bogus.
Well, bogus might be a little strong. People can determine for themselves, but the media narrative is bogus. And let me give you a little bit of, behind the scenes here, Kevin. As you know, I'm a guy who tries to pursue the truth, even when it's unpopular. And I have a great deal of distrust, obviously, for the mainstream news media for good reason. And when I first heard the Brian Banks story, and I live in Los Angeles, where Brian Banks grew up, in fact, until recently was living very near where he went to high school, I thought, wow, that's a hell of a story. And in fact, my first reaction was, and that's why I laughed when you texted me today, was this would be a hell of a documentary.
That's what I texted John today.
Right, that's why I laughed. I said, Kevin, you and I think a lot alike. But back when the story became, somewhat well known, and he was allegedly exonerated, I thought, my goodness, what a great story! I really feel for this guy. I would love to be able to tell this story, and so I wanted to find out more about it. So. The first thing I did, and first thing I found out was that there already was a documentary in the works that he was behind, and that was my first sign that, wait a minute, something's a little amiss here, because this wasn't just an idea he had for a documentary. There was already a website. They had a production company. They clearly were, in the works. It would seem to be pretty premature based upon, what had transpired. I mean, he had not yet been fully exonerated and the charges or the conviction expunged and what have you. So that was my first sign that, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then as I learned more, I realized that this story is vastly different than what the mainstream media will tell you. The first thing that is wrong about the narrative is this. You are, and you implied it in your telling of the story, which of course was, understandable. You're telling the mainstream news media version of the story, so people will know what you're talking about. What we're led to believe is that because of this false accusation of rape, Brian Banks lost out on his college career, right? That Pete Carroll had offered him a scholarship to USC, and that because of this false accusation of rape, he lost out on the USC scholarship and then ended up going to prison for several years and then, of course, losing out on an entire college career and who knows, maybe even a pro career. Well, that's false. And the reason why that's false is because what happened here was that Brian Banks was going to summer school before his senior year at Long Beach Poly, which is a high school powerhouse here in the Los Angeles area. And while he was at summer school, he was found to have had sex on school grounds with the girl in question. Now, this is not in any way, shape, or form debated. In fact, I spoke to the white male principal of the school at the time. I said, could you explain to me what actually happened here? And he said, oh, yeah, sure. They were found having sex on school grounds, which means he's automatically expelled, which means there's no senior year of high school football or no graduation, which means regardless of rape or not, there's no college career. Okay? That's done. It's over. So he was expelled from school, and there's actually a Los Angeles Times article, and I find it interesting, Kevin. I'm a Kennedy assassination buff. I believe that Oswald actually... Right, and I believe Oswald backed the loan, and I recently found an original copy of the Dallas Morning News from the day after, and it's amazing how accurate that information is in comparison to what we learned, the 50th anniversary, all that got reported incorrectly, I believe, about all this conspiracy bullcrap, and so interestingly, when you go back to the time period in which this happened, there was an article in the Los Angeles Times which makes it very clear that Banks had sex with the girl, was expelled from school, and he later later pleads guilty to this crime of having raped the girl.
Okay,
Now,
John, that's an interesting point because the mainstream media narrative, it at the very least implies that he was convicted.
no, he pled guilty.
Big difference. Big difference.
And this is Brian Banks' story. Brian Banks' story is, well, I'm a young black male in Long Beach, California, and I'm under pressure, and my attorney is telling me I need to plead guilty because if I don't, I'm going to get if I go to trial, I'm going to get convicted because I'm a black male football player, and, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in jail. Well, that is a story that the media, of course, is willing to lap up, right?
Sure.
Well, here's the problem with that, and I can't believe his attorney, and I think I understand why. But it's if I was his attorney at the time, I'd be furious because he's basically implying that one, either I'm incompetent, or two, I'm a racist, or maybe three, both. Well, it turns out that his attorney is a black female who is a judge in Los Angeles now. So she's not incompetent and she's not racist.
Yeah.
Okay. And she's a woman, okay? So clearly there was a reason why she was urging him to plead guilty. So he pleads guilty to this crime of rape, and he goes to jail. Now, so then, of course, as you already said, we now know Brian Banks' name because he's allegedly been exonerated. Well, here's how he got exonerated. He tells this very nice story of the fact that somehow the accuser contacted him via Facebook and wanted to get together, and he is somehow able to videotape her saying that he did not rape her, and that this videotape, and by the way, it's not that declarative. It's not like she's sitting on this videotape crying, "Oh my God, I'm sorry I ruined my life. This is horrible. I can't believe I did this."
Right.
No, this is, "No, you didn't rape me." That's basically what she says, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that there was a rape. I don't know if there was a rape or not. I want to make that clear. I don't know. But I'm just telling you what really happened with this Brian Banks story and how it became a national cause celeb for the media. So he gets this tape, and the Innocence Project, and I am very dubious of the Innocence Project because Barry Scheck runs the Innocence Project. People may remember his name because he was the lead DNA defense attorney for O.J. Simpson, okay? So I'm sorry. I do not bow at the Innocence Project. I think they get a lot of people who are not necessarily innocent off because of technicalities and other things. But anyway, so the Innocence Project takes up the case, and they are able to get his conviction overturned. Now, as you know, Kevin, this is another important distinction that would be lost to most people. He's already served his sentence. So it's not as if a judge decided, okay, I'm going to take this convicted rapist out of jail. I mean, there's a different, whether it's legalistic or not, there's a different standard to wiping a conviction from the record as opposed to taking somebody out of jail before they've served their time.
Absolutely.
So he serves his time. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Right, and so it's a lower standard. So he gets allegedly exonerated. Well, here's what the interesting thing is, and this actually got reported here in Los Angeles, but nationally the news media decided, well, we're going to ignore it because it doesn't fit with our narrative. The victim, or the accuser, whoever you want to call her, later says, by the way, I didn't really mean to recant. Brian Banks offered to pay me if I said he didn't rape me. Now, do I know if that's actually true or not? No. But I do know that we've been told in virtually every other case that the victim is supposed to be listened to. The presumption is victims are always telling the truth, especially in the Sandusky case. They're telling the truth even when they're not telling. Even when they say three different things. Yeah. But the reality is we're been told that victims or accusers are to be believed. Well, the media just ignored that. Let's just ignore it. Now, does that make any sense? It actually does make some sense when you think about the fact that this documentary was already clearly on his mind and in some way, shape, or form in production. Because the documentary becomes a heck of a lot more valuable. In fact, it becomes viable once he becomes, quote unquote, exonerated, right? Without the exoneration, there's no documentary, there's no national news story about this. No one cares. So you could make a I think more than reasonable argument that what she's saying is plausible because Banks had a financial incentive, not just to wipe this from his record, but he could have made money from what would end up happening because of this alleged exoneration. Now, Banks, during his national media tours, has had problems remembering exactly what happened. Because I've seen him do interviews in which he said he did have sex with the woman, and I've seen him do interviews where that was no longer convenient to the narrative, and he said he never had sex with the woman, which is awfully interesting because, again, I talked to the principal of the school who says there was no doubt about it. Brian openly admitted he had sex with the girl. It was just a matter of whether or not it was consensual or not. So that set off more alarm bells in my brain. Okay, why is he not telling the same story? Why is he changing his story? Well, I think he was changing his story because he felt like it was better for the media narrative if he wasn't caught on school grounds having sex and therefore being expelled, and therefore that was the reason why his college career was done. By the way, technically he was never offered a scholarship by USC or anybody else. That was...
John, let me stop you because this is an interesting point I don't want people to lose. I never saw in any of the national coverage of this story, the Today Show or anybody else, 60 Minutes or anybody else that he appeared on, say that he was expelled for having sex on school property. That never made it to the national media, apparently. And I never heard that. I never was aware that he had a black female lawyer who is now a judge. That was never brought out. And the fact that, of course, he never received a scholarship was portrayed as he didn't get his scholarship because he was accused falsely of raping this girl. Did any money ever exchange hands, or can you find a money trail between the two?
This is where this story becomes very complex, and in some ways, I think, kind of shows you just the insane result of this whole thing. So the victim, the accuser, whatever you want to call her, she, after Brian Banks pleads guilty, and I think that's an incredibly important point that cannot be lost. He pled guilty, of sound mind and body. He's not an idiot, by the way. He's clearly a smart guy.
Yeah, I sure don't plead guilty. I don't plead guilty to rape. I got news for you if I'm innocent.
Right. And by the way, one other point about Long Beach. See, people need to understand, Long Beach in whatever year it was, 2003 or 4, whatever it was, Long Beach in that time period is not 1962 Mississippi, okay? Long Beach is a city. Long Beach is a predominantly black city, a city in which, around this exact same time period, 3 white girls on Halloween had the living crap beat out of them by a black mob shouting racial epithets, and almost nothing happened, okay? This was not a situation where a black man was not going to be able to get justice or a fair trial, all right? Let's make that clear. But, of course, in the national media scope, they think black man, oh my God, he had every right to not expect that he was going to be treated fairly, and therefore he pled guilty.
Exactly.
So he pleads guilty, and the school district ends up paying the accuser several $100,000. Now, making this more complex is one of the accuser's parents works for the school district. So now you got all sorts of, why did this happen? Was there some favoritism? Who knows exactly what transpired and all that. Well, when Banks got exonerated, the first reaction from the school district was to say, we are not going to pursue the accuser for more money, or the money that we gave her. We're just going to basically let this. Right, we're just going to let this go. Which to me, I always thought, like, well, wait a minute, which is it? Was he exonerated or did she lie? I mean,
exactly. And John, interestingly, we can only be thankful that Obama was not in office at the time, because he would have weighed in and said that Brian Banks looks a lot like his son. If he had a son.
Well, Brian is a little bulky to be Obama's son. Obama's pretty skinny, so but Brian's a big dude.
But that that's the kind of crap we have to put up with in covering these things, such as the Zimmerman trial. Well, Trayvon would have looked like my son had I had a son. What?
Right. So now, just to finish the story. So then after the media backlash, the school district feels like they have to at least pretend to try to get the money back. Well, this accuser, of course, has already spent all the money. This was several years ago. She wasn't rich to begin with. And so they get a judgment against her without her even showing up into court, without even being represented. They get a judgment against her to give us back the money. Well, now, of course, she's in hiding. I have spoken to her attorney extensively, and I'm convinced, based upon my conversations with him, that Brian Banks' story is, at the very least, highly suspect. There's a very good chance this was, in fact, rape, that she is still saying it was a rape, that she has completely recanted her recantation, and she has not backed off of this allegation. Brian Banks offered her money to recant. And I go back, again, you can find it on the internet. Her recantation on video is, and I'm not, who can predict exactly how anyone's going to react, but just using your normal, natural human instincts and inclinations. If someone's really recanting, having put somebody in jail, destroying their lives because of a lie, I would think that their recantation would look and sound differently than what this girl provided to Brian Banks on videotape.
You would think. I saw that.
Right.
I saw it when I believe it aired on 60 Minutes when I saw it, and I remember thinking at the time, this is hard. It's hardly what I expected. I expected what you described, that this woman was going to break down and not knowing she was being taped and start crying and sobbing and plead for forgiveness because of what she did to him. That is not the case at all. In fact, he almost has to beg her to recant, if I recall the video, because she doesn't
really
say anything.
It's really almost checking the box. It's almost a check-the-box recantation. And again, you don't need to take my word for it. It was, in fact, if you look carefully on YouTube, there are some initial local news reports here in Los Angeles which do reference the fact that, oh, by the way, the accuser no longer says that he didn't rape her and is accusing him of offering to pay her money if she recanted. And again, for the record, her attorney, and I spoke with him just a few weeks ago, and I've been trying to track her down, but she doesn't want to talk. I'm still trying. But her attorney, who I believe to be a straightforward guy, and I know him fairly well from other people in town, he says that the version of the story I just gave you is still her version of the story, and so. What do we have here in the end? What we have here with Brian Banks' story, Kevin, I find pretty amazing. And, of course, there's no way in the world that either of them would have possibly ever concocted this together, because no one would be this smart. But what we have here, here's what we know we have. We have two high school students who clearly had sex on campus during school. And what happened because of that? One got paid several $100,000, and the other became famous and got an NFL tryout because of it. Now, that's pretty amazing when you think about it, isn't it?
It sure is. You're right. I don't think that day they thought, if we have sex on school property, here's the way it's going to turn out.
No, but that's the way it did turn out. I mean, one got a couple $100,000. The other became famous and got an NFL tryout.
And I think she got more than a couple $100,000. I think it was a pretty hefty sum.
I don't remember the exact amount, but it was less than $1 million for sure. And I remember it for some reason I remember it being in that $300,000 range. But I'll have to check on that. But
it's a lot of loose change either way.
Yeah, right. I mean, no question. And again, it's all gone. So I'm going to continue to try to pursue this story. Of course, when I wrote about this, and I mentioned this to you in text, I wrote a column about this, and no one would pick it up. I mean, even though I knew, again, much like the Steubenville story, much like the Penn State story, I knew way more than anybody else did, but I was telling a story the media didn't want to hear. So, that narrative doesn't fit. And, of course, when they don't know all the facts, they presume that you're crazy. They know, you must be a racist, or why are you pooping on our party we're having here for this Brian Banks exoneration story? It's such a nice story. Why do you want to bother us with the truth?
It's so touching, and most people would feel that she should go to jail for doing that to him. And that's what they're going to keep running with.
Well, I don't know what actually happened. And to be 100% fair, when I spoke to the principal, again, the white male principal of the school at the time, who's now principal at another school, he felt as if it may not have been a rape, but he was positive they had sex on campus. And again, Brian has denied that in certain of his interviews when it's inconvenient for him to have actually had sex, and that was the reason why he was expelled from school well before there was any jail time or anything like that.
I find it interesting that anyone would plead guilty to rape and then deny having had sex, period. Not only are you denying that you raped her, you're denying that you had sex, period.
Right, but
that's
again,
bizarre.
I've seen him.
And yet you pled guilty. And yet you pled guilty to rape.
Well, I've seen him tell both stories, which again, of course, is never a good sign. When you're, times when you're claiming, I had sex with her, but it was consensual, and other times, no, we never had sex. So people can decide for themselves what that means about his veracity. But the bottom line of this whole thing is, it's a classic example, and I bought in too. I bought in for about 2 days.
As did I.
It's where the media buys into a story, and then facts be damned. It doesn't matter. Once they love the narrative, unless something just unbelievably bombshellish comes out and destroys it, then they're just going to hold on. They're going to hold on for dear life. And, I'll be interested to see what happens with Brian Banks' documentary. And, it's quite possible that he might have an unexpected guest at opening night for that documentary.
That might make another documentary. John Ziegler is our guest. We must point out that the news is just coming down that former South African President Nelson Mandela has died at the age of 95. He's been hospitalized for quite some time, and he passed away today. Another top story today, of course, John, was Jameis Winston down in Tallahassee, Florida. We've been talking about that extensively on the show. All of a sudden now we have an accuser who is confused and not very credible, according to what the state's attorney has said. So no credibility. My friend and I, a criminal defense attorney, and I have talked about this. Our feeling immediately was, if what the state's attorney said at his news conference is accurate, in which he basically said she's just not credible, her attorney would have held the news conference and angrily denounced what the state's attorney said. Yet she didn't do that. In fact, she issued a dog with the puppy tail between his legs statement saying, the victim and her family appreciate the state attorney's efforts. What? You appreciate him saying that you are not credible?
Yeah, that first line I found to be odd, although if you read the rest of the statement, it goes on to say that she was raped and makes it very clear that they disagree with the decision. I don't know whether that was just normal.
Well, I tend to disagree with you on that summation, because she doesn't ever say she was raped. She refers to her as the victim. But
the word rape was in that statement. I saw it on ESPN.
She says she reports her rape, but she's not. Yeah. She's saying she's going on to say that the victim had the courage to immediately report her rape. She relied upon them to seek justice. The police she's talking about. The victim has grave concerns that her experience has it. So it's really an attack on the police department. But
right.
Not at no point does she say what the state attorney concluded is absolute balderdash. My client was raped. She was coherent. She gave an accurate description of what happened. Nowhere in there does she say any of that, which leaves, in the perception of anyone with a thinking brain, everything the prosecutor said was gospel truth.
Oh, no, and by the way, that's a very plausible, if not probable, scenario. And I don't know whether or not Winston is guilty of anything. My stake in this, if you will, obviously, is the guy who runs FramingPaterno.com and is a huge critic of the news media, specifically ESPN. I was looking at it from the perspective of the hypocrisy of the media in general and ESPN in particular, because it has been striking, the hypocrisy here on this issue of innocent until proven guilty. And let me give you a classic example. I find this stunning, and I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with me. So ESPN decides that, one of the major topics for discussion after it's learned that he's not going to be charged is, should he win the Heisman?
Right.
And almost to a man, including Kirk Herbstreit and Trevor Maddich and numerous other people who are highly, highly critical of Joe Paterno and called for his head immediately, their knee-jerk reaction was, oh, no. I mean, of course he should get the Heisman. He wasn't charged with anything. We believe in innocent until proven guilty, and this should have no bearing whatsoever on whether he can win an award, which has in its description, Kevin.
In its description, you're exactly right.
Has in its description an allusion to character. So this is mind blowing. So let's compare. They're not a perfect analogy, but they're pretty close. So in Winston's, let's go with Paterno first. Paterno, not accused of any crime, certainly not accused of a rape. He testifies truthfully to a grand jury, and ESPN, it gets praised by prosecutors the day of the indictments, and ESPN screams, fire the bastard.
Right.
And Winston, here we have a situation. He's actually accused of a rape. He refuses to speak to investigators or police or anybody in law enforcement or the prosecution's office. And he gets determination that they're not going to charge him. And ESPN's reaction is, give him an award that has character in the description.
Right.
I mean, and by the way, this would be hypocritical. Just make this very clear. This would be hypocritical if the discussion was, should Winston be suspended from the team? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, should he get the privilege of the biggest award in all of college football? And so, in ESPN's mind, somehow he should not be punished by having an award restricted from him, but Joe Paterno should have his entire 61-year career destroyed, and he should be fired when he wasn't accused of any crime, and he came forward, spoke truthfully to the grand jury, got praised by prosecutors. And
not only that, John, but let's not forget he wanted to have a press conference and answer all questions, and the university prohibited that. And yet ESPN thinks Joe Paterno, given that backdrop, is somehow a villain and somehow should have his entire 61 years of wonderful behavior stricken from the record books, and his legacy should be that of some sort of a child predator enabler?
Right.
It's so mind-boggling, it makes you want to strangle somebody. Mostly the people at ESPN.
You almost couldn't concoct, because of the Heisman element, you couldn't concoct a more bizarre, mind-blowing scenario. Because, again, I can't emphasize this enough. The discussion about the Heisman is, do we give him an award? Not that we're going to suspend him or kick him off the team or kick him out of school or whatever, which is what happened to Joe Paterno for all intents and purposes. This is an award that has character in the description. And ESPN is saying it would be outrageous and wrong for voters to not vote him the Heisman Trophy, no matter what it says in the report that's being released, no matter what you think about what may not have happened. And by the way, the other element of hypocrisy, and I tweeted this as well to much chagrin of a lot of people. I said, okay, so now that we have the Jerry Sandusky 1998 precedent where Sandusky was not charged with a crime there, I presume that all of Winston's current and future supervisors throughout the rest of his life must presume he is their rapist in case anything else ever happens to this guy, right?
Right.
I mean, based upon the 1998 Jerry Sandusky precedent, and if anything does occur with Jameis Winston in the future, according to Mark Emmert, all games will be stopped and home victories will be taken away starting last year.
Yeah,
because that's when this happened.
Before he ever played a game. So if he is ever accused of anything in the future, all of Florida State's wins this year to be wiped out, and should they win the national championship, that should be vacated. That's the same illogical form. Now, people will laugh at you and me for saying such things, and yet that's exactly what ESPN and the national media supported with Penn State and Joe Paterno. And on top of that, it blows me away that we cannot get rid of this element. Joe Paterno's white, Jameis Winston's black. And if anybody doesn't think that is a big factor, they're out of their minds.
Well, no, there's two things. You're 100% right, Kevin, but there's two. So, of course, the next question would be, okay, so why this massive disparity? I believe the black-white issue absolutely plays a role. I mean, by the way, it's not necessarily attacking Joe Paterno because he's white. It's just that Joe Paterno didn't have that extra protection.
Exactly, that's my point.
That he doesn't have the force field protection of being black. But the other thing is, Winston is about to win the Heisman Trophy and, maybe win a national championship and have a pro career. He has a future where the news media can use him and they need him. Joe Paterno has no future. Joe Paterno was dead in the water. At best, it was his last year. There were no more national championships. It was over for Joe Paterno. So unfortunately, human beings determine, oftentimes, I think more so every day, they react to people based on what they think they can do for them in the future. What you did for somebody in the past is now irrelevant.
Right.
I mean, the definition of loyalty is what do you think this person can do for you in the future? And Joe Paterno could do nothing for the media in the future. Jameis Winston still can do things for the media in the future.
Yes, he can.
And so those two things combined, the white-black thing and the young-old thing, I think are why it is that the disparity here is overwhelming. And by the way, I would argue that there's disparity even in the way that Jerry Sandusky was treated as compared to Jameis Winston. But that's another story for another day.
But you are right with the racial aspect of this. It's not that Joe Paterno was persecuted because he was white. It's that he didn't have that extra layer of protection of being black. And had he been black, had he been Eddie Robinson at Grambling, it never would have happened.
Oh, in a bazillion years, exact same circumstances happened to Eddie Robinson, and nothing. No way that he ever gets punished. And in fact, I'm sure that the media would have found some way to make him the hero, because, as I've said a million times, you could have easily made Joe Paterno the hero in the Sandusky story. He was praised by prosecutors the first day of the story. I believe to this day, I'm positive, even more today than I was yesterday, because every day it gets stronger and stronger feeling that without Joe Paterno, prosecutors don't even indict Sandusky. Forget about Gurley and Schultz, the administrators in Penn State, because I think if Mike McQueary is out there on a limb all by himself without Joe Paterno backing him up, I think the prosecutors were so concerned about their case, so insecure about their case, they wouldn't have gone forward with it. So Paterno allowed them. He gave them the cover to go after Sandusky. So he could have easily been turned into the hero here, but the media decided that wasn't in their interest.
Bingo. Great stuff 2 days in a row, John. Fantastic.
Thank you, Kevin. Always great to talk to you.
Appreciate having you on. Thank you, buddy.
Bye.
That's John Ziegler from FramingPaterno.com with the latest on the Brian Banks story. I'm telling you, anytime you believe what you read in the national media, you're believing the wrong thing. The only thing you should believe is what I tell you and what you read in the Bible. Now I can hear people out there going, he thinks he's God.
What an interpretation.
That's what they'll say. I did not write anything in the Bible except notes.
The book of Slaten.
It's not the book of Slaten.
I love it.
They would have rejected it because I would have gone after all these scumbags in the media. All right, let's take a break.